Honeymind is about to come out. By the time this interview runs, it will be out. But I've been, deep diving it in preparation for this interview. It's a gorgeous record.
Thank you.
So congratulations. And I guess I'll start with kind of just an open-ended question about how this is different or, unique from the first two records you've done. You've worked with a lot of country people on this one, like Dave Cobb and Brandy Clark. And, is this sort of like your country adjacent record, your Americana record?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I started writing for this cycle, it was like spring of 22, so it's been a little while. And I
Mm.
tried to, at least when I always start kind of down the path of a new record, just not necessarily come in with like a stylistic plan and just sort of see what comes out. And I think because I'm writing from a slightly more settled place, I turned 30 while I was writing this record, and I'm getting engaged to get married. And I think just what naturally was sort of emerging was a little bit more plaintive and unadorned and narrative and sort of folk sounding and warm and Americana. And I think I loved that direction. And so once I had a few songs I really loved, I then, in a much more sort of focused manner, sought out a lot of great writers in Nashville that I've always wanted to work with who live a lot in that space, like Hillary Lindsay and Natalie Hemby and Brandy Clark, of course, who's featured on the album. And it just seemed to really fit the energy and the emotions that I was sort of living in. And I was listening to a lot of Fleetwood and Paul Simon and
Yeah.
James Taylor, and just loving the kind of crossroads of that sort of sound and era with like a super expressly queer perspective. I think that was a really exciting like little combination to me.
I did one, as you mentioned, turning 30. That was actually something I was going to ask about. For some people, that's an exciting and happy thing. For some people, that could be an anxiety inducing thing or something that creates a quarter life crisis or whatever. How did turning 30 affect you in good or bad ways? And especially in making this record, you've sort of touched on it, but in making this record.
I think I felt really prepared for it. I think because I'm lucky enough to be in a relationship that is really healthy and happy, and because I had this album to sort of process that transition in time, and I felt like emotionally, physically ready for it. And I also started working as an actor when I was 9 years old, so I've sort of
Mm.
been a little bit ahead of my age group a little bit in terms of like priorities for a long time, and sort of felt like I was already in this zone for quite some time. So it feels correct to be properly in this zone.
Am I correct I think I've read that your fiance now, he wasn't your understudy. He succeeded you in Dear Evan Hansen. He played it after you did that
He
role.
did. We met several years before that. We were
Oh,
friends
okay.
doing comedy and stuff together, and then just by the universe, he ended up being the playing the role after me.
Okay. I wonder if there was any kind of competitiveness there or like, I didn't know if that's how you had met. So like that would be an interesting way to meet, a meet cute, as they say.
Yeah, no, I mean it's sort of a trauma bond because that role is really a handful. So to know that we both had that experience is a beautiful thing to connect on. But no,
Hmm.
we sort of had a lot of a will they won't they history before we even got there.
Well, why is that? I mean, you were sort of joking, but like, why is that a trauma bond? Or like, why is the role a handful? Why did you say that?
It's just a super, he's filled with self-hatred and anxiety, and physically he's very tight and bent over, and he sings an inordinate amount of music, and he has a catharsis on stage. It's just like
A
a
lot.
really, it's a tall order, and it's not necessarily like the most joyful thing to perform, but it's so obviously fulfilling and a wonderful role, but it definitely takes over your life.
So in that regard, when you make your own music as under your own name as Ben, do you want to kind of swing the other way, of the spectrum and not do that kind of intense? I mean, not that your music's not intense, but it is more joyful, I would say.
Yeah, I think I tend to really just let whatever is actually happening to me in my life and my experiences lead the way. And thanks to Noah, a lot of that is living in a really joyful, celebratory, loving place. So a lot of Honeymind definitely lives there. But in the past, I think there's been more kind of melancholy stuff or, rageful stuff. But I do tend to love the sort of soft, introspective, romantic zone.
So I read in, I'm going to look here at your press release I have up it. You had a goal of depicting loving queer relationships when you were making this record, or especially when you were making the title track. And, we're talking about that now. And, so tell me about this goal you had, why that was important to you, especially we're coming up on Pride Month. You're releasing this album literally the day before Pride Month kicks off.
I know, what a coincidence.
Is it a
Yeah,
coincidence or was that a plan?
it's one of those universe things where it really aligned with the run I'm doing right now at the Palace on Broadway and the album release, kind of all crossroaded in the right way. I wouldn't say sort of like at the outset of writing that it was a goal, but I think since writing my first record, I've my materials, both in terms of the visuals and also the songwriting itself, has been pretty inherently queer because just that's my specific experience. And I think things need to be as specific as possible to be universal. So I feel like it never occurred to me to like edit that back.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first started releasing music, I didn't necessarily think about what that element of it would be, like how people would react to that, or how that might be, a powerful representative thing for young queer people or for myself, or we like to think we're quite far along, which of course we are, but I think it still goes a long way to really express and name those things, especially without the context of trauma or oppression or otherness, and just have it be about the humanity and the complexity and the joy. So I
Mm-hmm.
think once I saw that this album was going to be largely about Noah, because that's sort of what I was inspired to write about, I think, as I was saying, the idea of kind of reclaiming super traditional, like American images and sounds and tropes and doing them in like a very expressly queer way felt like something I'm really proud to do, and that it was very much like an inspiring element of putting the record together.
Didn't this album sort of get sparked by some kind of loved up mushroom trip or mushroom chocolate situation?
The title did, yeah. I was already
Okay.
working on the record, but we were talking about like we were taking a lovely hike with the help of mushrooms, and we are talking about like anxiety and the ways that love allays those anxieties. And I started to talk about like the images of what I would imagine the inside of my mind looks like you do when you're taking mushrooms. And I just thought about this image of everything being coded, everything difficult and sharp, and kind of
Mm.
like getting in each other's way, like stress and anxiety, blah blah blah, being sort of just like coded and made a little softer, warmer, more golden. Honey came to mind. Started saying Honeymind. Loved the phrase and the feeling of it. Wrote a song with Michael Pollack, who's a great friend and co-writer, that I loved for the record. And then when it was time to pick the title, it just seemed like a really nice kind of tone poem that summed up the whole thing.
Wow. So there's other songs I have a list here that because I have all the lyrics. So like there were certain songs that like stood out to me. I definitely want to ask because you're talking about like American imagery, All American Queen about this. How I read it or listened to it is about like, a queer effeminate kid in the sticks. Tell me about because some of these songs I assume are about you, but some of them seem more like story songs.
Totally, yeah. This was definitely more of like a story anthemic kind of thing. I wrote it with Alex Hope, who's a writer on, I believe, 5 songs on the record. They are also queer, an amazing writer, and we were really excited and inspired by the idea of like, these songs like Sweet Child of Mine and Born to Run, and like really like, origin story, American anthemic songs, and having one that was just very particularly about, like, as you said, a super queer, effeminate young kid growing up in the middle of America. And I think the idea of like that being such an inherent part of the tapestry of being an American and makes you, if anything, more American, no, certainly no less, I think was really fun and exciting and not something I'd heard expressed. And I love the idea of giving that kind of a kid an anthem and allowing him to sort of embrace a sort of patriotism, but like turned on its head in like a super gay way.
Awesome. Well, I have other questions to ask about, but since we're talking about story songs, just in real time, it dawned on me, since you obviously are a theater person, would you make a musical that was about, I don't know, about Andrew or about this kid? We'll talk about the song Andrew in a moment, or like about this kid, this all-American queen. Like, have
I
you have you done that? I'm sorry if you haven't, I don't know, but have you thought about doing a musical where you write the book for it?
100%. One of my bucket list goals has always been to write a musical.
Okay.
I think undecided in terms of like, would I use a songbook I've already written? Would I write something new? I think I'm sort of waiting for inspiration to strike in terms of writing an original musical and having a story that's like worthy of being musicalized. I think I'd really love to not adapt like a film or a book or something and just like try to make something from scratch. So trying to take my time on that one, but 100% on the bucket list.
Yeah, you have enough songs at this point. You could almost have your own jukebox musical of your own songs. Tell me about Andrew. I don't know if Andrew's a real person, a composite of people, if it's you, if it's Noah. The song Andrew.
Yeah, he is definitely a composite, sort of an amalgam of experiences. I think when you're queer, I mean, everybody experiences unrequited love, but I think particularly when you're a young queer kid, and you have friendships with wonderful straight people who treat you well and with respect, and they are friends, and there's just a tendency to develop feelings that you don't know what to do,
Mm.
excuse me, what to do with and where to put them. And I think I was really, once again with Alex Hope, I wrote that song, was really inspired by just like that very particular kind of melancholy where like no one has done anything wrong and there's no one to blame, and it's just a chemical misfire. It's like a genetic disconnection, and when you're a kid, you just don't know where to put those feelings. So I love the idea of like putting a song out in the world where those feelings could go.
And then there's a song called Shoot a Drop that mentions two other people, Sammy and Marty. And again, same question, what's the story or who are those people?
Yeah, I wanted them to sort of be universal, kind of like, gender neutral characters that anyone can put their relationship on, but certainly inspired by Noah and I. Noah's really um, a very helpful agent in bringing me back to earth and calming me in terms of my own anxiety. And
Mm.
I think, on the flip side, I'm able to put things in perspective for him. And I just was really inspired by like
Mhm.
the kind of give and take of what we can do for each other. And like, when it's someone's turn to sort of like take hold of the wheel, it's all about sort of like sharing the responsibility. And um, I was listening to a lot of, as I said, Paul Simon, and like me and Julio down by the schoolyard and Cecilia. And I wanted to write a song that felt like kind of like hanging out around the campfire, jamming, super warm, and like just free and organic. And so that's Shoot a Drop.
And then the last song I have is The Boy Who Hung the Moon. There's a lot of really sweet lyrics in this, like the boy who kissed me first and loved me from the start. I would assume this song is an autobiographical song about your relationship with Noah, but why don't, it's almost like a wedding song or something.
Yeah, Before I Knew You and Boy Who Hung the Moon is sort of definitely wedding vibes. But I think, yeah, that song is very much about Noah and I's relationship. I think we're both artists, and I mean, this I'm sure applies to relationships with people who are not, but as an artist, you very often lose your way in terms of self-esteem, and you start to doubt yourself. And
Mm.
it's very common um, to just get down on yourself. I think for anyone, but particularly if you're consistently having to put yourself out there. And it's happened to me. It's happened to Noah. And one of my favorite things about our relationship and the things I'm most grateful for is that we can help each other to see one another through our eyes. And when he's feeling low or when he's not having faith in his abilities and in his specialness, I can remind him the way that I see him and all he does for me, and try to get him to see what I see, and vice versa. When I'm scared of going on or doubting my music or whatever it may be, he can, remind me the way that it hits him and the way that he sees it. And just wanted to write a song about the ability to like lift your partner up.
And so when we were talking about how you met, or, with my mistaking the thing, perhaps you met through Dear Evan Hansen. You were friends for a long time. Like, how long have you guys been together as partners?
We met when we were like 20, so it's been about a decade of knowing each other, and we sort of dabbled in dating every so often for the first 5 or 6 years. We've been together properly since January of 2020, so about 4.5 years.
Oh, wow, that was interesting timing.
Yeah, I know, right? It was a
Like,
very universe intervention once again. It was like make or break for everyone, I think, that time. So for us, it was exactly what we needed in the sense that we had nowhere to hide, and we had no excuse but to focus on each other and really put it under the microscope and see, is this really it, or should we just resign to being friends? And it turns out that this was really it.
so did you like immediately, I don't know, I guess go into lockdown again? A lot of couples did. Like if they started dating right before the pandemic, it was like, well, I guess we're gonna live together or we won't see each other kind of thing.
We spent the first couple of months a long distance, and then he came to LA to live with me and my family for what was supposed to be a few weeks and ended up being like 3 or 4 months. So he really did dive right in with all my siblings and my parents, and
Yeah.
living in a really intense and intimate kind of situation that all of us obviously were experiencing for the first time. And that was the time where I fell the most deeply in love with him, just seeing him acclimate so easily and embrace everybody. And I was like, I know it's hopefully, God willing, the pandemic's going to end, but I would not mind continuing to be locked away with you.
When are you guys getting married? Do you have a
We're
date
going
set?
to in the fall. Yes, we have in the fall here in Brooklyn.
What's your wedding gonna be like? Do you have it all set, planned?
A lot of Jews, a lot of dancing. Uh, we're very hell-bent on the right playlist and the right energy in terms of the dance. I think that the sweat and dance level is the main measure for us of the success of the wedding. And
100%.
Noah's much more the aesthetic and culinary forte person, so I'm sure it will look and taste very good. But I'm much more of a yes man for that.
Sounds like you guys do have a good dynamic, good
Yeah.
complementary dynamic between you. I'm curious because you said that before you guys got together in January 2020, you'd dabbled in dating, I guess. What made it right? You know, was it just an age thing or where you were in your lives that, you know, like you mentioned, recently turning 30, like what made it right that this time it, I guess, stuck, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think all the above. I think it was largely me that needed to come to my senses. I think when I was young, I had a very particular idea of what I was looking for romantically, and I thought that friendship and romantic connection really existed in two totally different planes, and that
Hmm.
when I was going to be attracted to someone or want to be with them romantically, it was going to be this volatile, ineffable, sparky thing I had to sort of tame and build a relationship on top of. And I think, like you do in your early 20s, trial and error, just wanted to see what was out there, and then sort of realized that, the main purpose of being with someone or spending your life with someone is because they are your best friend and you want to download with them and experience things with them, and like you actually enjoy the same things and spending time together, and you want their opinion. And but just when things happen, they don't really feel like they've happened unless Noah's experienced them or he's weighed in on them. And I think that I didn't know that this love and that spark and that attraction and romance could grow on top of this foundation of friendship. And so I was just so pleasantly surprised. And it wasn't anything I thought it was going to be in the best way.
That's awesome. I mean, obviously meeting at 20, that's kind of not a mindset where you're thinking about marriage or settling down in any
It
way.
was very lucky that we went and took our time to sow our oats. And then when we were semi-adult, we came back together and ready to do it.
And then when you met, if I'm getting the timeline right, although I know you've been out to your family and friends for a really long time, I think since you were like in middle school age, you kind of recently come out like publicly around age 20. Am I correct in that? Maybe
I guess
19, something like
I
that.
guess what's like perceived as my coming out really wasn't until I put out my first album. So that was like
Oh,
when I was 23 or 24, because that's when I
oh,
did like visuals that involved, queer relationships and stuff. So that was in some regards received as a coming out. But I always thought that was strange because, like you said, it came out when I was 12, and anyone I've ever worked with or known or had any kind of personal relationship with longer than 10 minutes has known that I'm queer. I don't ever really think there was like a coming out.
yeah, yeah. I read that and I remember like being a little confused if that was true. I think I read it on your Wikipedia page. So
That's
maybe
right.
have that amended. But it seems like it's when you were putting out music under your own name, it was important because at your time saying that was your first album, it was kind of important from the start to lead with those sort of narratives.
Totally. Like I said, I think I come from the theater, and I only really want to write music when there's something that feels either complex or emotional or intense to the point where I don't want to just talk about it. I want to musicalize it. And for me personally, just a lot of that is relationships. And so naturally, those are going to be queer experiences. And I don't see any need to shift them or edit them back from the specific experiences that they are.
Of course not. Since you are from the theater, and this is something I've asked other people from the theater, I've asked Cynthia Erivo this. I've covered shows like American Idol and The Voice for a long time. And one thing that quite frankly pisses me off is when Simon Cowell, whoever the judge is, says, you're too Broadway, or that's too theater, or that's too theatrical. Really pisses me off because I'm like, what do you mean too Broadway? You mean that they can sing live and dance and do it like six, 7 times a week, like perfectly without a net? Like, how are you saying that that's a bad thing? So like, and also you have foothold in both worlds. You have foothold in like this folk pop thing you're doing of your own singer-songwriter music, but you're obviously very much a theater person. Like, what are your thoughts on the fact that that is a stigma to some people that you're not you, but in general, someone's a Broadway person?
First of all, couldn't agree more with what you said.
Good.
Um, I think it's sort of melting in a good way, like myth busting right now, that like there's this huge difference because there's so many people who are straddling both worlds, like Cynthia, Renee Rapp, myself, Sarah Bareilles. I think it's like, in the golden age, the songs on the radio and this and like the kind of the hits were the songs from Broadway, and like those singers were one and the same. And so I think that everything in a certain regard is theater. Like even pop stars who have like a more, you know, organic, apathetic point of view, or, you know, live in more of like a hip hop style, like whatever the sort of like persona that you've decided to perfect and put on and recreate in performance is to some regard theater. So like I think just because one is associated with like sometimes having vibrato or like singing from a chest voice or a belt, or, you know, having polish as you perform, I just don't think it's relevant. I think it's all the same thing. Obviously, if we're talking like legit, like Oklahoma, you know, Rodgers and Hammerstein musical theater, sure, that's a very particularly Broadway style. But I do think I'm happy to see the lines blur, and I think that they should blur until they disappear.
Did you, when you first, I imagine this is sort of water under the bridge for you now, but when you were first releasing your first solo album, did you experience any of that kind of pushback or skepticism? Like, oh, you're a Broadway guy. What are you doing making this album kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it stylistically existed as enough of a neighbor to that kind of music that it wasn't too jarring for people. But I do think there was a bit of a like, oh, this is just sort of riding the coattails of Evan Hansen, and he's just finished this record for this album, you know, for the show that everyone's familiar with, and so why not just make one to go along with it? Which I'm so grateful that that was like a platform to start doing this. But I do think that hopefully now, as I've, you know, had more experience as a songwriter and put out more albums and toured as myself several times now, that I've sort of created a different sphere separate from that. So certainly, yes, I think and in that initial detachment, I did experience some skepticism. And I think I've learned to just sort of embrace that, like what is particular and special about what I do, which is sort of why I'm doing sort of this Palace residency in the first
Yeah.
place, that I do get to exist in both places, and that they don't need to be proven to be independent from one another. As you were saying, they can really be symbiotic and help each other.
Tell me about this Palace residency. I know that the first night, Casey Musgraves, who I adore, she surprised everyone. She came out and performed with you.
She did, yes. So I'm doing a special guest each night to
Oh,
come and surprise. Last night was Kristen Chenoweth, um, and this comes out.
I'm gonna put it out on Monday. Everybody.
Oh, okay, great. So by Monday, there'll be Leslie Odom Jr. There'll be Noah, my partner, is going to come out.
Nice.
My co-star from Evan Hansen back in the day, Laura Dreyfus, is going to come out. So I have lots of little tricks up my sleeve. But yeah, the residency is sort of an amalgam, as we were saying, of this new album, Honeymind, and some of my old records that I still really love, and then some Broadway covers as well. And kind of feels like the first show that I've done where I'm able to bring everything that I do together into one evening, and has been a really wonderful, special experience.
That's amazing. Well, you're obviously at least a triple threat. So you do film as well. So I got to ask about this movie you're doing, Merrily We Roll Along, because if I'm not mistaken, it's literally being filmed over 20 years. Tell me, there's a movie, and I'm sorry, I'm having a brain fart at the moment, but it's like that movie Patricia Arquette was in that she won the Oscar for.
Boyhood, yeah, same director. It's Richard Linklater.
There you
Um,
go.
exactly. So he loved the process of that, and Merrily Roll Along is a Sondheim musical, and it's about the disillusionment of a friendship over the course of 20 or so years, and it's told in reverse. So you meet the characters at their oldest and most jaded, and some of them don't speak anymore, and you kind of go backwards a couple years at a time, and then the story ends with them in college meeting each other at their most naive and loving. And so we're shooting it obviously in the correct order, and then it will be edited backwards. But I think he was really inspired by the opportunity, if we can make it. I think we have like 16 years left to see this group of friends like actually devolve in real time. And it's an unbelievable treat. I mean, my best friend Beanie Feldstein's in it, and Sondheim is the greatest composer of all time, and Linklater's a great director. So, and Paul Mescal, who's like one of our greatest actors, is in it as well. So it's sort of like this beautiful little short film I get to check in with every couple years. And it's a good, knock on wood, it's a good motivation to stay well and take my vitamins. And
I was about to say that's quite a commitment, especially when you're a busy guy, with all the things you're doing. You don't know where you're going to be in 7 or 8 years. You might be on tour, you might be doing another film. Like, what was there any kind of trepidation to sign on for such a long commitment?
not at all, just because it's such a special piece with special people, and Sondheim and musical theater is at the very center of my heart and soul. And I think we had a big, meeting and kind of huddle at the very beginning of the process where we all just said, came to the, reality that like this is the kind of thing we're going to have to prioritize on a personal level, and that every couple of years when it's time to get together and find a week or two in common to film a sequence, that, our reps and our people in our lives are not going to be the ones to prioritize that. It's going to have to be the thing that stays important to us. And so there will never become a time where I don't want to, do everything I can to make time to keep it going.
So I mentioned that Patricia Arquette won. She did win the Best Supporting Actress for Boyhood for a similarly structured film. Is this how you're going to get your EGOT? I mean, you'll have to wait like 16 years maybe to get it, but
Listen,
you're just the O away.
I'll take any kind of O that comes my way.
Is that a goal? Like, there aren't that many people who, especially from the pop music world, who have won an EGOT. I just think Jennifer Hudson has, John Legend has, but not too many. Is that, I mean, I imagine it sounds like maybe kind of silly to say it out loud, but like, is that a goal to be an EGOT winner?
Not so much an active goal in terms of seeking out projects for that purpose, but it would of course be such a cool, wonderful thing someday. So keeping my ear open for it, I guess.
Awesome. What other goals do you have? You've already, by age 30, you've already, you've been working since age 9. You've already done so much. Like we mentioned sort of you wanting to do a musical, I guess, is on the list, but any other things on the bucket list?
I'd love to write a musical. I'd love to continue to write with Noah. Noah and I wrote this film theater camp together with some of our other friends, and loved the experience of making a film together. So we'd love to do that more. Love to be in some more film. I think I've done a lot of film that exists in like a slightly heightened universe or a musical universe, or there's always a bit of a archness to it. And I would love to tell a couple stories that are super grounded and like live a little more in like an organic reality, like play a little closer to myself would be really fun. And make more music, of course. Trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, there's this musical called Sunday in the Park with George, which is another Stephen Sondheim musical. That's sort of my ultimate dream role, has always been to play George in that. So in the next, 5, 6, 7 years, would love to do that. But open to the universe presenting me with things I'm not even thinking of.
Awesome. And then just to tie a bow on it and bring it back to Honeymind, we were talking about the expressions and depictions of queer love and queer relationships in a joyful way. I'd love your thoughts on, we're obviously in some very fraught times right now, and you said you wanted to present this album and those kind of stories without I forget your exact words, but without it being like tense and traumatic and it actually being happy. Like, what is the importance of having those kind of stories, uh, especially right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think with all the anti-LGBTQ legislation, and particularly the anti-trans legislation, I feel like a lot of the space that we have to take up as queer people is devoted to just continuing to fight for like our humanity, our equality, our rights, things that like, should be givens. And obviously those things are hugely important and we don't have the luxury of not doing that. But I think Pride is the opportunity to lean into celebrating each other purely for our specialness and humanity and complexity and joy, and bragging about the things that are cool and special about being queer people. And I think giving yourself sort of the day off metaphorically, and just reveling in your identity rather than having to prove why it's worthy is such an important thing. And I hope that the album can be a nice soundtrack for that. And that's how I feel about being queer. I'm really happy and lucky to be queer, and love being part of the community, and love how it informs my life and worldview and sense of humor, and wouldn't trade it.